So my name's Aparajita. I'm doing the sort of tech hosting for this seminar and next month, seminar 2. That's partly because I'm a bit of a fan of Naga Bodhi. Some of you will know Naga Bodhi maybe even better than I do. But we go back quite a long way, at least until the early 90s. And my fondest memories, or my most contact with Naga Bodhi, was in the early 2000s when he was the president of, well, he's the president of the United States, really. But at least in Sri Ratna terms, he was the president of Ariloka, the retreat center in New Hampshire, where I was living. And I have enjoyed at least one session on the Bodhicharya Avatara with him back in the day, and I kind of associate him with it. And so I'm very happy that he's agreed to do these couple of sessions, and who knows, maybe more in the future. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Naga Bodhi, and he's gonna, well, he'll tell us what to do.
Okay, well, we're going to, well, first of all, hello, and thanks for showing up. Oh, I've suddenly been spotlit. Oh, isn't it? I want to see you. I'm just going to do something about that. Oops, I've got someone else now. I've got Aparajita. Help! How do I get myself into, yes. That's better. There you are. How beauteous mankind is. So yes, lovely to see you. At least one screen full, and every now and then I might tap across and look at other screens. I think we'll be joined at 7 o'clock with some other people, by some other people after the meditation. So I won't say too much. We're going to begin with a period of meditation, which will kind of ease us into the territory that we'll be covering over the next couple of hours. The Bodhicharya Avatara, this text which talks about the entry into the path of the Bodhisattva, the entry into the path of the spiritual life, you know, from the viewpoint, the standpoint, the perspective of the Mahayana, which has a particular emphasis, you know, in some ways on profound wisdom, but also and in particular on very, very high level and refined practices of compassion. But much more of that later on. I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit of what I can with you about that material. But I suggest to begin with, you just ease yourself into whatever posture, whatever place you want to for a shortish meditation, a kind of metta, but I'm going to lead us into it. And it's, you know, it kind of has elements of metta, it has elements of a bodhicitta practice in some ways. We're just going to start taking us into the territory in our hearts, at least as much as our minds. And I'm sure Aparajita will let people in mutedly as we proceed. Okay, so just settle into whatever posture, whatever place you've chosen. And it's coming towards the end of a day. And so you've probably been doing things, being in places, talking, shopping, whatever. So maybe spend a little bit of time just in your mind recapitulating in flashbacks, just a kind of journey you've been on through the day, just a series of flashbacks. And in this way, just letting your mind catch up with your body that's sitting here. Just as you find yourself now in whatever room you're in, whatever space you're in, and whatever sounds there are around you, or any sense of an atmosphere around you. And then just settling into your posture, relaxing into your posture. Maybe take 3 or 4 slightly deeper breaths, and with each out breath, just allow yourself to arrive a little bit more fully here. Just letting go of the need to be anywhere else, to be thinking about anything else. And just taking in how that feels, just how you are in your body at the moment, what you're touching, what your body's resting on, your feet are resting on. Just feel the contact between your body and the chair or the cushion or the floor, between your skin and your clothes. And the way your breaths come and go. Just feeling the quality of each breath, whether it's deep or shallow, long, short. So just give yourself that kind of gift of not having to do anything more than just kind of appreciate how it is to be here. Just however that is for you, in your body, in your mind. It may be that as you sit here, you are able to just kind of sink into a relaxed, easy, comfortable posture with a lovely, obedient, calm, tranquil, spacious mind. Or it may be that there's maybe conflict. Do I want to be here? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I comfortable? Some preoccupation, just something on your mind, something you're doing tomorrow, something that happened last week. You're not trying to block it out, just kind of noticing what your experience has been, even in these few moments that we've been sitting here. Did your mind wander off, and if so, was it to a worry? Was it to a plan? Then to your body, maybe it's sitting comfortably. Or maybe you realize as you sit here now that you're holding tension, or maybe there's discomfort, maybe for some of us even pain. And just see if you can open to whatever your experience is and just noticing the texture of it. It might be a texture that's sort of in place all at once, a comfortable part of the body and an uncomfortable part, or it may be just a series of sensations in the mind, in the body. Just one thing after another, a thought, then a moment of rest, a twinge, an itch. And just kind of noticing, opening. What's it like to be you at the moment? And just to be completely open, transparent to yourself. Just the nature of your share of the human experience right now. In your body, in your mind, in your heart. And just seeing as you sit here, whether you can just sense that dimension of your life, the texture of it, the variety of it. Maybe for some of us it's very slight at the moment, nothing particular to worry about, to want, no particular discomfort. Or maybe some of us are working quite hard against impinging thoughts, discomfort. And just whatever your experience is, just settling into it, opening to it. Just letting it be, letting yourself be. And just bringing a kind sense, kind of almost fellow feeling towards yourself, just being with yourself. Companionably, openly, honestly, just as you find yourself, just as you are right now. You might just want to say words like, may I be happy, may I be well. May I be free from suffering, have ease of mind. And then for a while, just think of a friend of yours. Just take your time to just bring to mind someone, a close friend. Somewhere right now, you might know where they are given the circumstances of so many of us being at home. But wherever they are, just see if you can, I'm not trying to telepathically connect, but just imaginatively sense that not too far away maybe, they're breathing, They're sitting, standing, walking, running. They have their experience of their body at the moment. Just as you're breathing, they're breathing. And maybe you don't know what their experience, their immediate experience is, or maybe you have some idea. Maybe you've spoken to them today, or you know they're going through something, or dealing with something, or celebrating something, but just kind of connecting, and in a slightly reflective way. Just like me, they have their experience right now of being human. The body, the mind. Maybe hopes, maybe fears. Maybe as you breathe, you imagine them breathing with you, just sharing this moment of being alive. And wishing them well as we make our way through life, through the human life, the human condition, with whatever it brings. We just feel we're sharing that, wishing our friend well. May they be happy. May they be well. And then in your own time, maybe including other people you know, people that you've just passed on the street or seen in a shop today. People in your area, maybe, people in your family. And just taking your time, just extending that sense of inclusion, just how we're all surrounded, maybe near, maybe far, by others. Just sharing this moment of being alive. This body, their body, this breath, their breath. This life, their life. Some we know are sick, close to death maybe. Others dealing with grief, while others are having a wonderful evening walk, celebrating something. Just opening to the texture of life, breathing with it, breathing with each other. Nothing forced. nothing rushed. Just seeing if we can sense our common experience, our shared experience, even now in this moment as each breath comes and goes. And just like us, they try to look after themselves. Just like us, they seek happiness. Just like us, they get it wrong. Hurtle towards suffering instead. We're just holding people in our hearts. People we know, people we don't know. May they be happy. May they be well. May they be separated from the causes of suffering. Just how strange it is that we're all alive right now. Of all the things that could happen, here we are. Just doing our best, making our way. And just maybe relaxing any need to feel you're doing a practice. And just giving yourself just a few minutes now to just sit with yourself as you find yourself now. If you want to stay with your breath, you can, or just sit, just absorbing. Okay, we're bringing this practice to a close. Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. No apparatchita, will keep an eye open for anyone else who wants to join us. And again, thanks for coming. Thanks for showing up. It's a beautiful evening out there. So I'm very pleased that some of you have come. I know there are other things as well. I know there's, I think I just heard that there's a, kind of quite a big online Zoom meditation session for people just moving towards our thoughts towards India. Where I think in the last week, even if we've heard of the death of 4 members of our order from the virus. So, these are desperate times. So yes, I'll begin with a reading from our text. I'm kind of assuming that, I've often led study sessions on this stuff. I'm kind of assuming there'll be people here who've never encountered this text, but hopefully there'll be enough in it for everyone, for value. But I will assume that there might be people out there who've not encountered this text for whom it's quite new material. But let's start with a reading from the text. If even the thought to relieve living creatures of merely a headache is a beneficial intention endowed with infinite goodness, then what need is there to mention the wish to dispel their inconceivable misery, wishing every single one of them to realize boundless good qualities? Do even fathers and mothers have such a benevolent intention as this? Do the gods and sages? Does even Brahma have it? If those beings have never before even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how would it ever arise for the sake of others? This intention to benefit all beings, which does not arise in others even for their own sake, is an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth is an unprecedented wonder. How can I fathom the depths of the goodness of this jewel of the mind, the panacea that relieves the world of pain and is the source of all its joy? If merely a benevolent intention excels venerating the Buddhas, then what need to mention striving to make all beings without exception happy? So, welcome to the Bodhicharya Avatara. Welcome to this text, the Bodhicharya Avatara, meaning something like the entry into the path of practice of enlightenment. Some people think that its full name should be the Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, in other words, the entry into the path and training of a Bodhisattva, because this is the territory that we're in. We're in the territory of the Bodhisattva and the realm of Bodhicitta. A Bodhisattva, in case the word is new to you, I kind of doubt it, but just in case it is, the Bodhisattva, literally enlightenment or awakening being, someone who is considered to be the kind of ideal Buddhist. Somebody whose entire life energies are dedicated towards the path towards enlightenment, but with the rider of seeking enlightenment for the sake of all beings, not just for oneself. And to say we're in the realm of bodhicitta, we're in the realm of, well, again, bodhicitta, enlightenment heart, enlightenment mind, awakening heart, awakening mind, sometimes translated as the will to enlightenment, sometimes translated as the spirit of awakening. You could say it's that field of potentiality out of which bodhisattvas emerge. And that's not the first time I'll talk about either bodhisattvas or bodhicitta, but just to kind of set us going. I'll just say that much, that we're encountering through this text the ideal of the bodhisattva and the sense of something called bodhicitta, something that's talked about as bodhicitta, the jewel of the mind, the perfectly awakening mind. Many terms are used. Maybe, hopefully, by the end of this session in a couple of hours, you'll feel a little bit closer to what it might mean and what bearing it might have on your practice and your attitude, I think, in particular, to practice. It's a short text. This is one of the translations of it. Look, it's not a big book. It's very thin, and a lot of that's introductory material and footnotes. 10 chapters in verse, but a totally comprehensive, complete guide. Even more than a guide, a manual of the spiritual life, particularly from the viewpoint, the standpoint of Mahayana Buddhism, that aspect of Buddhism that courses in profound wisdom, but also in the highest levels of compassion, and a path of training epitomized, at least on the highest idealized level, by the Bodhisattva. It's been described as the most sublime ideal ever conceived. This ideal of someone, as it's sometimes put, though I might add a rider to that later, the ideal of having all your energies, every ounce of your energy throughout your life, even in your sleep, dedicated to cultivating qualities that allow you to be of use, of help to all beings throughout time and space. It's a short text, as I say. It's poetic and it's philosophical. I was on a conference years ago in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and there are a lot of Buddhist scholars there, quite a few of them very early on in their careers, still doing their doctorates and so on. And I asked them why in 1987 we still only had this translation of the Bodhicharyavatara, which is the one that Sangharakshita used when he led study on it. And it was interesting. Quite a few of them had tried. They'd had a go at it, or knew people who'd had a go at it, and they said that if you try and translate it, the Sanskrit gets more and more and more difficult to translate because there's it is so poetic, so complex, so sophisticated. It was a kind of translator's graveyard. But I'm happy to say there are now at least 7 translations of the text. It's a short text. As I say, at times poetic, at times deeply philosophical, even metaphysical. It's psychologically extremely astute, not just in terms of what it has to say about things, but in the way it's treating you, the reader. It's also incredibly challenging in the way it treats us. It pulls no punches. It's coming from the sort of highest idealistic level and from somebody who really means it and who wants us to really mean it. So there's on every page, at least, there's a challenge that's going to send you off howling or at least thinking. It's a very, very intense book, but it's utterly beautiful and incredibly inspiring. Its author, Shantideva, and we're back in the 8th century of the Christian era here. Very little's known about him. In a way, almost nothing is known about him, except that he left us with two books. He left us with the Bodhicharyavatara, the book we're looking at right now, and he left us with a kind of an anthology, the Sixta Samuccaya, much more of a kind of formal, a kind of anthology of sayings and readings. In a way, it's a bigger text, and it's again about the totality of the path, but drawing references from all over the Buddhist scriptures that the author Shantideva had access to at the time. But beyond knowing that he wrote these two books, pretty much nothing's known about him. And instead, what we have are some really lovely legends and myths, which I'd love to go into, but if I started, I'd probably take up too much of my time. Suffice it to say that some aspects of his legendary life echo that of the Buddha. He was from a royal family. He had experiences that made him decide to leave the palace the night before his coronation and head into the jungle and practice and have visions and visualizations. He found his way to Nalanda, the vast Buddhist university. And to use one of Sangharakshita's terms, he kind of manifested as maybe a good Buddhist, but as a bad monk. He didn't seem to be doing what the other monks were doing, living the way they did, following the routines that they did. Instead, he did his own thing in his own way and according to his own timetable. And the legend has it that the other monks at Nalanda got so fed up with this sort of scraggly ne'er-do-well, as they saw him, rather than just ejecting him, maybe that wasn't allowed by the rules of the university, they challenged him to give a talk about the Dharma. And they thought that if they did that, he'd quietly leave out of embarrassment, but he willingly took the challenge. And they said, yes, we want you to give a talk to everyone, the entire establishment, everyone here. And that was thousands of monks. And they built a stage from which he was going to give it. And they built it so high that it was, they thought the first thing would be that he couldn't get onto it. So as they gleefully waited for him, he appeared and walked up to the stage and just levitated and then delivered his talk. He delivered his speech, his account of the spiritual life. And the words he spoke are the words that we have before us in the Bodhicharya Avatara. So there's this lovely kind of mythic, legendary story to how this book appeared, how this talk, this song of the Dharma appeared. And there's a really nice element to the story, which I think is really important. The story goes that he spoke quite normally, gave his talk, working his way through all these different dimensions of the spiritual life and how it works, in this wonderful poetic language. But as he came towards the end of his talk, he rose into the air. He rose up from above the stage and then disappeared into thin air. But his voice carried on in everyone's ears. Everyone could still hear him talking. And what I take from that is something really important. I see the Bodhicharyavatara as a guided meditation. It is a book, you can study it, you can talk about it, you can learn from it, but it really is a book to take into a shrine room, to read in a shrine room, to just be with a few verses. You can get an enormous amount of nourishment out of one talk. And in an ideal world, I'd be giving at least an hour's talk on pretty much every verse in the book. It's that rich and that beautiful. Sometimes within that totality of the guided meditation of the Bodhicharyavatara, there are, in a way, mini meditations like the one we'll encounter in a month's time when I do another session on something quite a few of you are familiar with, the Shantideva's sevenfold puja, his path of practice, leading towards, or one of the ways in which the bodhicitta can be tempted into emerging in one's life. Something, again, to just, it's kind of scene setting, but it's important scene setting. It was the first seminar that Sangharakshita led, a study seminar. It was the first text that Sangharakshita studied in a seminar, took away about 8 or 9 people in November 1973. And with a tape recorder running, they spent about 10 days looking at this text and at Marian Matic's introduction to the text in the first translation. It's interesting that he did, and it wasn't insignificant. I think to some extent, Sangharakshita at that time felt that for people of our age, and most of us were in our early 20s or even younger, And given the state of Buddhism in the West as he'd encountered it after his return from India, he did think that a Mahayana emphasis would do no harm, and an other regarding emphasis would do no harm. He'd seen people in some places that he visited doing quite extreme vipassana practices. Let's, not talking about Goenka or whatever, it's just that was the language that was used then, but getting themselves into some quite weird states. And he thought probably a lot of us would benefit from having a broader approach to spiritual life and a more other regarding approach to spiritual life. He made a point of passing on, not in that seminar, but around that time, the importance of a teaching that had come out of Herbert Gunther's book, Aspect of Buddhist Psychology, on the importance of recognizing, that if, as pretty much anybody knows who knows anything about Buddhism, if enlightenment consists in the overcoming of the subject-object duality, the self-other dichotomy, then you might as well work on it on the other side of the formula than as on the self side of the formula. Sangharakshita definitely wanted to point our attention away from a kind of narrow individualistic approach to spiritual life. And so I think that was one reason, at least, why he chose to study the Bodhicharyavatara. It's maybe not a coincidence that in November 1973, he'd returned from a year's sabbatical and was ordaining some of us who'd been around for a year or two before he went away, and who he felt were ready. And a month later, I think just over a month later, I was ordained with several people. And immediately after our ordination ceremony, we moved into the library at Aryatara Community and held the first convention of the Western Buddhist Order. 24 of us, imagine that, sitting on the floor round the wall with Sangharakshita in an armchair, giving us the kind of rather surprising teaching, or not totally surprising, but he was saying, hey, look, it's not just me coming along once a week and running a class. You guys have got to be teaching. You can even think of starting centers. And over the course of the next couple of days, he wove the dream, the spell of a community, a movement, an order, a world. And all these years later, here we are. But I think, again, he was laying the ground in that seminar, at least in our minds, for the idea that maybe we got ourselves into something a little bit richer and deeper than we thought when we went for refuge with him. So, to the text, and all I can do is give an introduction to the text that we meet in chapter 1, which itself is an introduction not just to the rest of the text, but it's an introduction to the spiritual life. And I think a good way of putting it is that it's Shantideva's sales pitch. It's worth asking yourself, why be a Buddhist? Why do this stuff? Let alone why be a Bodhisattva? One of a saying of Sangharakshita's, it was something he wrote in a book review once that really struck me. He said, "You can't be a Buddhist unless you're free not to be one." It's very easy for us because we haven't grown up in an entirely pagan culture. Ideas of goodness and justice and pity and compassion, they're in the air. But imagine a time when they weren't, or imagine ourselves maybe being completely stripped of our, Judeo-Christian conditioning, or whichever conditioning we've grown up with, and just being pagans. And Sangharakshita did once say that, to be a Buddhist, you have to kind of find your way to your pagan roots, because it's hard for us to maybe approach the Dharma afresh. But maybe Shantideva, he's trying to talk to us as if we are approaching it afresh. Why would you do this? Why would you practice a spiritual life? Why would you, above all, decide to commit yourself to the ideal of the Bodhisattva? Shantideva is a kind of relentless persuader, a relentless salesman. As I say, he's extremely astute, and the whole text and chapter 1 is a very good example of how he lures us in. He doesn't just say, here, I'm a Buddhist, you should be a Buddhist. He starts with something much, much more fundamental, which I'll try and find and read to you. Just find the right term. Okay. Choosing, I might dance around from one translation to another, just so you get taste. This is from the Andrew Skillsman, Kate Crosby translation. So after a few opening verses, which we won't touch on today, Shantideva says, and listen carefully, it's short, this opportune moment is extremely hard to meet. Once met, it yields the welfare of mankind. If the advantage is neglected now, how will this meeting come again? There are other translations, but I simply don't have time to read them all, which is a shame. One of the translations says, not so much just this opportune moment is hard to find, but leisure and opportunity are hard to find. And what Shantideva is reminding us in that opening verse is that, hey, just look at yourself. Here you are. You're alive. You're in reasonable health. You're living in a time of peace. We can turn all this on ourselves. We're living in a reasonably civilized country. We're living in the same historical era where there's been a Buddha who's taught, who's left teachings and even left a community. You haven't got any mental trouble. Maybe you're not in debt. Just look at your situation. I mean, if we want, we could take it even further and just take a look at your situation. I mean, here we are. There was this big bang 14 billion years ago, and somewhere out of that, stars formed, clouds of dust formed, a universe formed, stars, planets, meteors, and somewhere along the line, for goodness knows what reason, we emerged, and here we are. As I said in that meditation just now, by some extraordinary chance. And if you go into quantum physics, it gets even weirder. Luckily, I can't follow it, so I don't have to get too weirded out. I just know it's weirder. But how strange. Here we are, and we have this life. We have our wits about us. We have this opportunity. We have this leisure. Not only are we here, but we're aware we're here, because we're here alongside lots of other animals, who are absolutely here, but absolutely lost in experience, just eating, hunting, whatever. But we seem to have this knack of knowing we're here, this knack of self-consciousness. I've been thinking over the last few weeks, just something that occurred to me is, why does Mara, the evil one, the evil villain of the Buddhist scriptures, why does Mara's name mean death? And it occurred to me that I don't really remember any details of my life until a particular time and place. And I realized that was also the time and place in my life when I knew I was going to die. I know this because the first I can remember being in a bed in that room with a praying, which was the last thing would be, God bless mummy and daddy. Not that I was, Christian, but it was just seemed like a good thing to do. And finish, and may I live forever. Because obviously the idea that I wasn't going to live forever had occurred to me. And I think, the fact that we are aware of our mortality is, in a sense, what starts the business of realizing I'm me. I am this story that seems to star me. I'm not just grass. I'm not just Hunt. I'm me doing these things, the me who is here, the me who's alive, the me who's going to die. And along with that self-consciousness, of course, comes all sorts of things. Once we've kind of got it, that I seem to be here, I seem to be a me, I seem to be a self. Well, I don't need to go into sort of Buddhism too much 101, but it's out of that sense of self, that idea of being a self, which can feel pretty real. It did to the 6-year-old me, or whatever, or however old I was. But it sort of means that from then on, we insert ourselves into everything. There's nothing that happens, nothing we see that somewhere isn't flavored by our relationship to it as a self, and therefore we're able to want it, to not want it, to push it away, to want more of it, and so on. Out of that sense of self comes greed, hate, and delusion. Out of the sense of self come the two darts, our capacity to constantly add, layers of prapancha, of proliferation to our experience. Out of it comes the kleshas, those kind of added extras of pain for ourselves and others that we just can't help, adding to experience. That's kind of all going on. That this is how life unfolds once we have inserted ourself into everything. It's why the Buddha, when he gives that teaching to Bahir of the bark garment, he doesn't just say in the seeing just the seen, in the hearing just the heard. He said, when for you in the seeing there's only the seeing, and so on. There'll be no you between in the mix. It'll be neither here nor there nor in between. But that's a high, that's for most of us, even if it's an accident, even if it's a delusion, it's quite a big ask. It's going to be quite a long journey for us to find a way out of it. So here we are, alive by some weird miracle, and we can't help wondering, as perhaps Shantideva is nudging us towards, we can't help thinking, and why? What's it for? Should I be doing something? It's like you've just turned up to some big collaborative venture, and you're wandering around thinking, should I be doing something? My father, when he was dying one evening, we were just chatting. Maybe it was a month away from dying. He knew it. We were just chatting about some events in his life, and it was kind of lovely some stories, and then he just smiled and he said, "Oh, what was it for?" And he said it with no rancor, no bitterness, just, how funny. What was it for? And what is it for? Is there a plan to it? Is there a purpose? Is it an opportunity? I mean, they're good questions. They're reasonable questions. Because if we don't ask that question, and when we don't ask that question, let's face it, for most of us, if we're honest, our life, may not be animal, but so much of it revolves around our instincts, around our impulses, around just playing out our conditioning, whether it's social conditioning or biological conditioning, religious conditioning, educational conditioning. We just kind of play out the script that we've imbibed. I mean, that's what samsara is. Samsara is a world full of people doing that, and they may do it with seemingly great energy and verve, but remember, Gampopa in the Jewel Ornament of Liberation defines laziness as acquiring mountains of wealth and subduing continents. If all we're doing is coming from our conditioning and our raw instincts, it's kind of natural. That's a given. Is that it? Is that all it's for? Maybe it is. Maybe, countless people probably say, yeah, that is what it's for. I mean, maybe I'd like to win the game, whatever it is, but, it's just a matter of getting by day to day, doing my best with the equipment I've been given and the life I've been given. But Shantideva suggests there's something more to it than that. And in the next few verses, he just throws something at us. So he's just asked this question. He's just begged this question. Is this an opportunity? Could this be an opportunity? I mean, in his view, he asserts that it is an opportunity that we shouldn't waste. So he goes on. Just as on a dark and cloudy night, a flash of lightning for a moment illuminates all. So, for the worldly, through the power of Buddha's blessings, a virtuous intention occasionally and briefly occurs. Thus, while our virtues are mostly weak, our non-virtues are extremely strong and fearsome. Other than bodhicitta, a compassionate mind wishing for enlightenment, what virtue can overcome the heaviest evils? So just as lightning on a dark and cloudy night, something very rare, but into this soup of conditioning and impulse and instinct, you know, the worldly mind, let's say, something can happen. We experience, you know, maybe a moment of completely unexpected, an impulse to be generous. You know, I mean, I don't think I'm boasting because I imagine we've all done it. But you know, I can remember once, you know, passing a dana bowl in a situation, and the usual amount I was going to give was in my hand, and I just had this impulse, you know, and I literally shook as I put this check into the bowl because I'd never given anyone so much. But I didn't even know where it had come from. But I had to do it. You know, whether it was something like that or a moment of empathy, maybe a moment of genuine remorse or an act of self-sacrifice. Maybe you've surprised yourself and you don't know where it came from. Maybe it was a sunset. Maybe it was an experience of love. Maybe it was something a bit more mystical, some kind of peak experience. But these things happen, and I'd be astonished if, you know, all of you, everyone I'm looking at, and those I'm not looking at, you know, knew what I was, you know what I'm talking about, that you just found yourself for some reason, on some occasions, just kind of something took you over, something came through you, an impulse that didn't come from your usual impulses, your usual conditioning, your usual nature, that kind of maybe took you by surprise, maybe even shocked you. And you kind of realize, you know, gosh, that's part of me too. That's part of my humanity. You know, this is that jewel sewn into the coat that, you know, we hear about in the White Lotus Sutra. You know, that there seems to be some potentiality that is outside of our conditioning. It's like a shift in perspective. It comes from a shift in perspective. It's a glimpse. You know, maybe it's a glimpse of some way of being other, a glimpse of having a different relationship to the rest of reality, certainly to the rest of humanity, than we thought we were in. I think I just came across this. It's beautifully expressed, if I can find it, by Albert Einstein. It must be here. Yes. Got a table covered with stuff. Okay, so Einstein wrote, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few people nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So that's Einstein, and I mean, you can find Buddhist equivalents all over the place, but I just think he puts it so succinctly. And I just thought that would be, just take us into a different voice. But yes, it's as if those moments just give us a glimpse of what it might be to wake up to another way of being, another way of seeing and experiencing. It's a glimpse, of this fully awakened mind. Hence, virtue is perpetually feeble, the great strength of evil being extremely intense, and except for a fully awakening mind, by what other virtue will it be overcome? And it's a really interesting thought, because if we do try and imagine what would I be like if it wasn't for my conditioning, if it wasn't for the law, if it wasn't for conventional morality, where do those genuine, authentic impulses to be more than just our conditioning, more than just instinct, more than just impulse, where do they come? The translation has some translations talk about the Buddha's power. Some talk about the gesture of the Buddha. Adhisthana, in fact, is the word, one that we're all quite familiar with. In a way, it's a mystery. Shantideva is prepared to accept in several places in his text. It's a mystery. The birth of this quality, is mysterious, this jewel of the mind. But it seems to be, that we can intuit from those moments, from those flashes of lightning, that it's possible to wake up from the delusion of an isolated self, to catch a glimpse of a universe that's free of selfhood, a universe in which we recognize, or an experience of the universe which recognizes that we are all interconnected, we are all interpenetrating, that none of us stand alone, none of us, no thing, no person stands alone. We're all just a flow of conditions, passing through us, passing through the world, in ourselves. Anything else, even if we're used to it, even if it's very comfortable and we've worked out how to do it, anything else, in a sense, is a delusion. And in potential, in waking up to the reality of things, there are tremendous joys, tremendous riches. So it's as if Shantideva just waggles this in front of us. Have you ever thought that life has a purpose? Do you think about things like that? And have you noticed how there seems to be something in you that isn't just what ho-hum everyday conditioning? You notice that, and it's like I can almost sometimes see him jumping up and down, saying yes, yes, yes. There's a lovely story about Chogyam Trungpa I heard from the General Secretary at the London Buddhist Society back in the 70s. Trungpa used to teach there occasionally when he lived in England, and one day somebody told Trungpa that he had problems with his meditation. So then and there, and Bert, the guy I was talking to, had been in the room, and Trungpa said, well, let's just meditate now. So Trungpa sat in his chair, and the person sat down in front of him, and they meditated. And after a few minutes, Trungpa leapt out of his seat and said, that's your problem. Whatever it was, that's your problem. And I can hear Shantideva saying, when we have one of those moments, there you are, that's your potential, that's it. Invest in it, value it. That's not an accident. That's more essential, more true of you than all those things you think the rest of the time. are you? That is a glimmer of a seed of bodhicitta, that bigger potentiality that's just a fact. It's just a fact of the emptiness of our delusion of self. That if we can just slough that off, it's not like the bodhicitta is some big force out there that will come and take us away, though it's written about and spoken about in that way poetically. But it's just what's there, potential in us. This, that if all our energy was able to go in the direction, just, freed up by losing, bit by bit by bit, this obsession with ourselves, what kind of a life might we have? What kind of a person might we be? What kind of a manifestation might we be in the world? And so he goes on, because he wants to kind of really trade on his advantage. He's kind of got us. Just find my way. So he's kind of pointed to us, saying, this is what your potential is. This is what you must seize on. This is what you must focus on. So he goes on. Those who wish to destroy their own suffering, those who wish to dispel the suffering of others, and those who wish to experience much happiness should never forsake the practice of bodhicitta, this spirit of awakening. The moment bodhicitta is generated, even in pitiful beings bound within the prison of samsara, they become bodhisattvas, a son or daughter of Buddha, and are worthy of veneration by humans and worldly gods. Just like the supreme elixir that transmutes into gold, bodhicitta can transform this impure body we have taken into the priceless jewel of a Buddha's form. Therefore, firmly maintain bodhicitta. Since the limitless wisdom of Buddha, the sole navigator of living beings, upon thorough investigation has seen its preciousness, those who wish to be free from samsara's suffering should firmly maintain this precious mind of bodhicitta. All other virtues are like plantain trees in that they're exhausted once they bear fruit. The enduring celestial tree of bodhicitta is not exhausted, but increases by bearing fruit. Just as when those who are greatly afraid rely upon a courageous one, whoever relies upon bodhicitta will immediately be freed from danger, even if they have committed unbearable evils. So why do the conscientious not rely upon it? Just like the fire at the end of the aeon, in an instant, it completely consumes all great evil. So he kind of hurls before us, like a carpet seller unrolling some rich, beautifully embroidered carpet, all these advantages that are just waiting for us if we invest in bodhicitta, the awakening mind, if we really take seriously the implications of those experiences, of our highest experiences. Something Sangharakshita says in the first lecture in the series on the Eightfold Path. I can't remember whether he's quoting James or Buck, but he says what makes a religious person isn't that they have spiritual or mystical experiences, it's that they put them at the center of their life. So this is what Shantideva is doing. Yes, you've had those glimpses, you've had those glimpses, and your intuition tells you that they really are important, they mean something, they are valuable. And boy, if only you knew that they are almost magical. That capacity you have, that potentiality you have, what's waiting for you if you can invest in your capacity to free yourself from the shackles of conditioning, the shackles of prapancha and so on. It are almost transformative moments. This impure likeness of yourself is transformed into the Buddha's body. We're getting into the territory of the Buddha within. That kind of language there. That at least in potential, we do have it in us to be totally transformed into somebody who is generous, who's energetic, who's creative, who's receptive, who's loving. It's all waiting. Why wouldn't you want to do what it's going to take? Why wouldn't you want to do the practices that will allow you to invest in your potential? I mean, this, he's talking to us and he means it, but obviously he's dangling a pretty high ideal. You don't, talking purely traditional terms, we have the story of Milarepa who killed people and gained enlightenment in the same lifetime, but not many people do that. I mean, but yes, if you really can slough off the idea of self, then in a sense with it you slough off all that is attached to that sense of self. So it's kind of there, it's in the tradition, but perhaps we have to kind of take it a little bit more calmly and say, well, Shantideva is pointing to our potential as human beings. That kind of fulfillment, becoming a bodhisattva is a little way down the road, but it's possible, it's available, it's worth committing ourselves to it. We can become a figure as compassionate as the Buddha, and I'll talk a bit more about that compassion and the nature of that compassion in a minute. But Shantideva then just gives us one important teaching. He says to think about these things, to reflect on these things, is important. And it's the almost indispensable starting point to a real spiritual life. And it's highly meritorious even to think about these things, even to start forming the wish to go all the way towards bodhisattvahood. But there's a world of difference between just having the desire, just having the wish to go, to travel that journey, and to actually be traveling it. And again, he dangles in front of us this lovely image of integration. Let's see if I can quickly find it. Even in cyclic existence, great fruit comes from the mind resolved on awakening, but nothing like the uninterrupted merit that comes from that resolve when put into action. From the moment that he takes on that mind, the awakening mind, to realize the limitless realm of beings, to release the limitless realm of beings with a resolve that cannot be turned back, from that moment on, though he may doze off or be distracted many times, uninterrupted streams of merit, like the bursting sky, continually pour forth. So even to start thinking and practicing, out of an aspiration to become a little bit more like a bodhisattva, a little bit less selfish, a little bit less self-centered, a little bit more available, to make yourself available to higher experience, higher forces and other beings. In itself, just that aspiration is highly meritorious, it's highly virtuous, it has its effect. But then, of course, there's the path to be trodden. And the rest of the book is, of course, about all the elements of that path. But before we finish with Shantideva's pep talk, I'm going to, in a little while, talk about, well, the way he encourages us to look at the activity of the Bodhisattva. And in particular there, I reckon a really important issue that we bump into is the place of the will in all this, because unless you've got clear about that, this is going to seem like too much. Sorry, mate. Not so much leave me out of this, but I don't know if I'm up for this. If all we think is that the Bodhisattva's benign activity is going to be a matter of willful good deeds, then we'll never make it. But there's an important conversation to be had there. But what I want to suggest now is, because I've been talking a little while, is that we take a break. And here's what I'd like to do is we take a 20-minute break until 10 past or 11 minutes past, let's say. And you might want to just take a few minutes, grabbing a cup of tea, going to the loo, whatever, and then make your way to a group that Aparajita will set up, probably just 3 or 4 people in each group, and just give yourselves a little bit of time to say hi and to maybe each have a few moments saying if in your life you're aware of lightning flashes. Do you recognize what I was talking about? Have you had a moment of unexpected empathy, unexpected generosity, a peak experience, something that made you realize, oh, I'm not usually like that. Where did that come from? Yeah, so just maybe share if you've got a story or two. So do that. So let's say I make it 8 minutes too. So if we meet at 12 minutes past, just give yourself time to do what you need to do, and then as quickly as you can get into your group, which Aparajita will sort out for you, and we'll come back together at 12 minutes past. See you in a minute. Don't worry, I haven't got as much to say as I had before, but just a little kind of flourish, and then I just want to leave space, because I imagine there'll be some comments and questions, so we can give time to that. So we're all back, are we, Aparajita? So yeah, the thing about the Bodhisattva and the whole Bodhisattva ideal, which I think it's sort of problematic because it can be talked about in with such hyperbole. Here's something that the Dalai Lama, apparently recites this to himself every day. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. And here's Shantideva. Although wishing to be rid of misery, people run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. For those who are deprived of happiness and burdened with many sorrows, it, bodhicitta, satisfies them with all joys, dispels all suffering, and clears away confusion. Where is there a comparable virtue? Where is there even such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this? If whoever repays a kind deed is worthy of some praise, then what need to mention the Bodhisattva who does good without it being asked of him? The world honors as virtuous a man who sometimes gives a little plain food disrespectfully to a few beings that satisfies them for half a day. What need be said then of one who eternally bestows the peerless bliss of the Sugatas upon limitless numbers of beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes? I mean, it's strong stuff, and some of I'm aware there'll be some of you who do have an easy way into rebirth, believe in rebirth. Others who I know will be agnostic, and some who might have no sense of it at all. But this kind of language that Shantideva and the Dalai Lama are using, is coming from people who see this as being a project, not just in this life even, but lifetime after lifetime. You may have heard of this way the Bodhisattvas described as being someone who puts off their own enlightenment until not only all beings, but even every blade of grass has reached enlightenment. And there's in the transcript of the seminar, you might have seen it, though there might be a more modern edition of it. This was the original transcript of the seminar that Bhante led on this text. there's quite a nice conversation recorded where he's asking the people who were on the seminar, what do you think this means? And all these people were bending over backwards, coming up with lovely metaphysical answers about blades of grass getting enlightened. And in the end, Sangharakshita said, well, look, it's poetry, it's, and we sometimes have to be a bit too careful about beating ourselves up, with what is actually someone's way of expressing something or trying to express something in hyperbolic terms, but they don't have to take it literally. But there is this about, the Bodhisattva ideal that we can sort of stray into this kind of area where, if in a Sangha like ours, where, I think that sort of is still there in the air, it's very much in the air, and what we talked about for a long time in the early days, and how we try to see ourselves. And Sangharakshita talks about our order as adding up to a bodhisattva. He's talked about this idea that bodhicitta is much more meaningfully thought of as arising not in an individual, but in a kind of team of individuals involved in a benign enterprise. That he finds that a more helpful way of directing in a way our attention away from the idea of it being my attainment or even my obligation. But it's quite easy, when practicing in this context, the context of this language, to feel the pressure of the idea that it's all got to be done by my will, in which case it would seem hopeless. How could you? How could you work tirelessly without cease, for life after life or after life? I mean, we are human after all. I mean, Shantideva is a monk, and he seems to be an incredibly intense one, and he's certainly not above giving us a hard time. And quite often in the text, he scorches us with his idealism and the kind of demands he puts on us. But he's not putting that kind of demand on us. It's not as if he's saying, yeah, you've got to save all beings, be all things to all people, just from your ordinary worldly intelligence, your ordinary will. There's an important verse or two in a later chapter where Shantideva says, look, we talk about the perfection of morality, or let's say generosity. He says, we talk about the Bodhisattva's perfection of generosity. And the Buddha and presumably other bodhisattvas have attained bodhisattvahood. And yet there are people still starving. So how can it be, that's the case? And he says, look, it's the state of mind that you're cultivating. It's the mind of generosity. It's, you can only do your best. It's not like you have immediately got to feed all beings in the world. You just have to do your best to cultivate generosity in your life. And the fruits will unfold from that, whatever it is. There's a chapter in the text on the perfection of patience, Kshanti, forbearance. And at times it's highly philosophical, even metaphysical. And it's the longest chapter in the book. And Shantideva throws everything but the kitchen sink into his arguments to persuade us that practicing forbearance is an incredibly important perfection to attain. But I love it that at the beginning of that chapter, he says, if something can be fixed, why worry? If it can't be fixed, why worry? And in a funny way, everything that follows could just be fed back to that. Yes, he'll lavish us with metaphysics and philosophy, and he's not doing it for no good reason. But it's really important to sort of see this does involve me. The Bodhisattva ideal, I don't have to think of it like as a child one thought of miracles that they happened 2,000 years ago in Palestine. This capacity that we have to develop that potential we have, that mysterious potential we have to come from somewhere else, which is selfless, which is capable of being generous, capable of being truly, authentically moral, and so on, that is within reach. There is a pathway to it, and we needn't be daunted by some before we even begin by thinking, well, I could never be like those people in those books. It's a journey. It's a journey, and who knows what it will ask for us. The Jataka tales are full of stories of sacrifice and so on. The bodhisattva who gives up his life for a starving tigress and so on. We've got those stories, but again, they're there to inspire us to say, well, what in my life might need my help and so on. But when that's coming, not from just our conditioning that it's a good thing to be good and so on, but when it's when we start to feel the wind in our sails of something from deeper within us beginning to inspire us to want to act in those ways to the limit of our talent, our ability, our strength, our stage in life, that's enough. That's all. That's all we can aspire to. But that's the vision that Shantideva is offering. It's very demanding, very challenging, seemingly extreme. It's also real. I want to read 2 quotes from 2 sections, just to sort of substantiate this a little bit, from Bhante. And just to say, I haven't got a huge amount to say in this part. I want to leave a bit of time at the end for questions and so on. So I'm just going to read these things, and after a while, I'll kind of stop and just let in the air. But I think these 2 extracts, which we'll find a way of putting onto some resource site, which I imagine we have associated with these talks. Sangharakshita says, "It should not be thought that the Bodhisattva ideal is literally an altruistic as opposed to an individualistic or selfish ideal, or that the Bodhisattva devotes himself to the spiritual good of others to the actual neglect of his own, that he helps others along the path which he himself does not follow. What he does, rather, is to adopt an attitude in which the terms self and others have become meaningless, or rather in which they have become indistinguishable in the sense of not being ontological identical, but dialectically related, so that in doing good to oneself, one does good to others, and in doing good to others, one does good to oneself, the one continually passing over into the other in such a way as to suggest a state beyond both self and others." I'm on a lower level of discourse. It's one of the conversations in the air at the moment is how do we get the vaccines to other countries, countries that are not so rich, not so developed, because, as we keep being reminded, or that people with any sense keep reminding us and the people in charge, is that until everyone has the vaccine, the virus will still continue to proliferate and vary. So it's a kind of, if you like, a real world analogy that, in some senses, is that we can't be happy ourselves until all are happy. We aren't going to be safe until all are safe. And in a sense, this little world, this real world example, it kind of gives us a glimpse into, well, what in fact is nothing less than the truth. We are interconnected. My happiness is dependent on yours, and so on. And then on this subject of will, Sangharakshita writes, "One should neither turn away from the Bodhisattva ideal because it cannot be realized by ordinary human effort, nor keep to it under the impression that it really can be realized by such means. Instead, there must be a radical change of attitude towards the Bodhisattva ideal. The Bodhisattva ideal is indeed a universal ideal, but one in truth becomes a Bodhisattva not directly, but indirectly, not by any egoistic exertion of the will, but rather by making oneself receptive to the cosmic will to enlightenment and allowing it to take possession of one, as it were, and work through one. This does not mean that there's no place for the exercise of the will, but only that its true function in relation to the realization of the Bodhisattva ideal is that of removing the obstacles to receptivity and creating within the individual life continuum the best conditions for the arising of the bodhicitta. So yeah, maybe a little bit hard to just hear me read it, but I'll get them onto some resource place where you can sort of read them more at your leisure. But they're just very succinct sort of statements of kind of how we can approach this stuff, as it were, safely, but meaningfully. I mean, the Bodhisattva ideal is a challenge. It is an ideal, but in a way, it is. I think what Shantideva is trying to say throughout this first chapter of his book is it also holds a promise that, in reality, something is awaiting our attention. In reality, something is there for us. Sangharakshita talks about the cosmic will to enlightenment. Now, he's the first person to bring a sledgehammer to people who take reificatory language seriously. You find plenty of evidence of that in his seminars as well. But he was also a poet, and the idea of to talk about the cosmic will to enlightenment is another way of talking in a language he was more comfortable with in some occasions. It's just a way of talking about our potential. What is sewn into the fabric of the coat we humans are wearing, this possibility of going beyond ourselves, of going beyond the way we normally apprehend the difference between self and other. And I guess there's the testament of history. It's been done. We recite in our sevenfold puja a verse from the Bodhicharyavatara. Well, it's all from the Bodhicharyavatara, but the verse of salutation, as many atoms as there are in the 1,000 million worlds, so many times I make reverent salutation to all the Buddhas of the three eras, to the Siddharma and to the excellent community. I pay homage to all their shrines and places where the Bodhisattvas have been. I make profound obeisance to the teachers and those to whom respectful salutation is due. It's a great verse. It comes after a particularly inspirational section of chapter 2, which we'll encounter in a month's time in the next version of this little seminar. First of all, we're saluting enlightenment itself and the Buddha. But then, so it's all still up there in this world of idealism, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, enlightenment, bodhicitta. Then, though, I pay salutation to all the shrines and places where the Bodhisattvas have been. You can go to India or wherever, and there are shrines. There are chaityas, is the Sanskrit term that's being translated here. It's like reliquaries. They have walked the earth. These people have been alive. There have been teachers. There have been people who've made real progress, who have impressed people with their action, with their states of mind. Bodhisattvas have been there before us. And not only that, there are teachers and there is an excellent community. There are teachers who can teach and there are people who are following the teaching. So gradually in this kind of, it's like an elevator pitch, literally. He begins at the top and just brings us down to earth saying, yes, it's ideal, but this involves you. And there's teachers and there's a community, if you want to, people who will encourage you, inspire you, challenge you to practice. So why not join in? So, this is Shantideva's pitch for bodhicitta, for the life of the bodhisattva, for, if you like, an approach to spiritual life which is profoundly total, profoundly wholehearted, and profoundly rooted in compassionate, based on the recognition that we're all in this together, that I can't simply think of enlightenment in terms of myself, not just because it would be selfish to do so, but it would be actually unrealistic, because the only way we can effectively become helpful to others is by recognizing the true, fundamental nature of, our interdependence, our interpenetration of self and other. So it's a short chapter, and I've tried to give you at least some kind of an introduction to it, but I hope it has managed to do that. We'll try and get a few things online, some of the things that I've read out, so you can revisit them. And of course, the main thing is, if you haven't already, to get hold of the text. I think in the mail out, you were referred to the Andrew Skilton Kate Crosby translation, which Winter's published, but there is in PDF form a complete version of Stephen Batchelor's translation available for a free download. And for many years, that was kind of the only other translation to the one that Bhante is around. And I still think it's an extremely good one, and it's free. So I think maybe what I'll do now is pause and just somehow maybe you can, if you have a question or a comment, you can unmute yourself, and we just have a little bit of space for any questions or comments that anybody might want to make. Who's that?
It's Joe. Hey,
Joe.
Bodhi. Thank you. Always a pleasure. I'm just sat here thinking about the conditions, actually, my personal conditions and our conditions. Everyone's sat here, everyone looks like they're in a home or something like that. And I've just been, you probably wouldn't be able to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I wonder often, am I better off in a community, to be able to work on this stuff we're talking about, and work on this bodhicitta, working towards being a bodhisattva. And I kind of sat here in my front room, and I've got a wall to sort out there, and I've got this other thing to sort out, and the kids and all of that. And I always imagine, that I'm better off in a community. But I just wonder if you could talk to that a little bit and laugh at me.
No, I'm not laughing at you. It's a good question, and of course, there was a time when there would have been probably a very proper answer to that one. Of course, get yourself to a community woman, get thee to a nunnery. I think just trying to think where. I've done both. I've spent I probably spent about 4 or 5 years in mixed gender communities, co-ed as we say when I'm in the States. I spent probably 25 or more years in men's communities. I lived alone for about 5 or 6 years. And I've been married for 12 years, I think it is, living with Vimalachita for more than that. So I'm working my way through all the options. Someone can let me know what the next one is. And they've all had, their advantages. I think if you're living in a community, let's say a residential community, there are some aspects of life which are less complicated. In terms of you're not just single-handedly responsible for running a household, cooking and so on, things like that. And if you're living with people who are genuinely inspirational, genuinely friendly, genuinely practicing together, and I've lived in situations where it was humming and it was great, and you just felt this is the life, and it was easy, it was relatively relaxed and uncomplicated. But I lived in communities that were, just, oh God, get me out of here, which were quite uncomfortable. There were tensions which we couldn't resolve, that our practice didn't seem to resolve, where almost the pressure of being in a community with the idea that we ought to be doing something spiritual, got in the way. So it's going to depend. I think in ideal, so I'd say that when I've lived in communities that worked, where we were genuinely friendly, we were able to be completely sort of morally transparent with each other. Like the idea of talking frankly about what you were working with, what sort of foibles you were trying to uncover in yourself. And there were people there also who were, like I lived with Vasandra for a long time, and he's, as people know, meditation's his thing. Whereas I was running Windhorse Publications and editing 2 magazines and was a trustee of Aid for India and all the rest of it, Karana Trust and all that stuff. And I mean, we had very different lives, and to live with somebody who, even though actually for quite a bit of that time, he was order convener and was very busy with that. But his kind of focus on meditation brought something into the community that I couldn't, and I probably brought something into it that he couldn't. And so I'm living with Subhuti, which I've done. Living with Bhante is something I've done for something like 6 years on and off, which, I literally am going to write a book about that sort of thing. And I have a tale to relate. I think I've been, I thoroughly enjoyed living alone for 5 or 6 years. I love living with Vimalajita, and I got a lot out of living, in communities, and that was a very big part of my life. But I've found all of them have served me in different ways, and that includes serving my spiritual life. And we kind of, there are opportunities in every lifestyle I've tried out for practice. Some of them are about meditation, some of them are about Kalyana Mitrasa, some of them are dealing with a difficult child or two, difficult divorce, maybe difficult dog in our case.
Yeah, well,
it's a bit of a glib answer, there's the prescribed answer, but I mean these days, so many people are living now. In these days, there's so many people in the order and in the movement are living in a much wider range of lifestyles, and I think we all have the duty still to take seriously, well, even more now than ever before, Sangharakshita's really important axiom that it's our order, and let's just stay with that, is neither monastic nor lay, which means it isn't lay and it isn't monastic. And I think it's a fantastic koan to throw at us.
Yeah.
I mean, for some years, I think we all smugly patted ourselves on the back as we all lived in communities, all worked in right livelihood, tree right livelihood businesses, and so on, that, we're doing it. No, we were doing it that way. But in a way, as that demographic shift has happened, we're all left with the challenge of that axiom. How do you live a wholehearted Buddhist life? When maybe you're not living in a monastery, but you don't particularly think of yourself as totally lay. How do you negotiate that? And in the end, ensure that your going for refuge is complete. Because, again, as Sangharakshita stresses, that's at the heart of it, that's what matters in your way, in your conditions. And that does include the choices you make. At the very least, he'd suggest that you think hard about the lifestyle choices you make and you discuss them with your friends who know you at least well enough to have a useful conversation with you when you're thinking of making a change.
Thank you. Yeah, good. Food for thought. It's there is no hard and fast answer, is there? I kind of felt into it then when you were talking about it, and yeah, good. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Suchimani.
Hi.
Hello, Nagabodhi.
Hi.
Hi, I really enjoyed you talking. I wondered if you could say a little bit about the effect that this text has had on your own life personally.
So say what I missed a bit in the middle.
Yeah, I wondered if you could say a little bit about the effect the text had had on you directly in your life. And that's quite a big question.
I think it's been, enormous. I spent a lot of time with it. I mean, funnily enough, I had an email from Punyamala today. She knew I was doing this. She's not here, but she reminded me of a weekend I led on this, the London Buddhist Centre, about 1976 or something, maybe a bit later than that. So I remember preparing for that weekend by reading the text aloud. I went on a solitary, I took myself away for, I think, a fortnight and read the text, the entire text every day aloud. And just to kind of familiarize myself with it, for it to go in. So it's affected me in that way. I mean, just on another, you said directly, well, that weekend made the LBC so much money, which in those days was probably about 10 quid, that some people in America and New Zealand and Australia realized that if they invited me out there, not only would they get me doing a seminar on Bodhicharyavatara, but they'd get somewhere from here visiting them, which never happened. So in fact, by a series of coincidences, I've ended up spending 30 years of my life regularly visiting America, Australia, and New Zealand, and a few other places. So, I mean, it's had that direct effect on my life. But the text, I mean, it's just there. I mean, it's there in the background. It's not like I think of it every day. It's just, I suppose, I think I was always drawn from my own early peak experiences when I talk about, well, it might be a moment of generosity or it might be a kind of mystical experience or something, but the outflow of something that happened to me when I was at university did convince me there and then that it was about giving, not necessarily putting your hand in your pocket and giving, but even like romantically, I'd think of trees are giving, you know, that it's the nature of things to give. It was something kind of a bit, you know, at some point in the story, after that peak experience, dope and acid got involved, but I think there was something genuine about it, that it always seemed to me that, you know, it is being there, you know, it is being, to the extent I can, being there, you know, being kind, being giving. I aspire to it, you know, which is to say that, you know, I mean, I don't know how much progress I've made down that path, but you know, and I think, you know, the Bodhicharyavatara, when I was trying to understand what had happened to me with my kind of peak experiences, I read a lot. I read Christian mysticism and Tao Te Ching and Bhagavad Gita, and it was when I landed on the Bodhicharyavatara, which somebody lent me, I immediately thought, that's my language. You know, that's my language, and you know, which is not to say I live up to it all the time, you know, but I definitely think that's the wavelength on which my aspiration travels. It's not necessarily, I mean, I'd love to do more meditation than I do, and I hope to make more space for that. You know, it's nearly 73, so I better get on with it. But you know, I think serving, doing stuff, making stuff happen has been a really important part of my, you know, my spiritual life, not just the fact that I got caught up in Triratna. But it is nevertheless incredibly strange and exciting, fulfilling to think that there's 24 of us around that room, sitting around the walls of that room in Purley, you know, have kind of led to this.
We've got Dharmapatya.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Nagabodhi. I've been enthralled this evening. It's been absolutely great. The thing that struck me is that in that verse 5, the way you've presented the idea of these lightning flashes, I've never really had the immediacy of a sense of that can be a personal experience. You know, I love the idea of lightning flashes.
Yes.
But it just tied in with something I did yesterday that's going to give me lots of pause for ways to think back on other occasions.
Yeah.
That
Good.
Can make an absolutely personal connection. And it's very special. So,
yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought of it like that before, so thank you.
And you know what? It was very, very recently that it occurred to me that verse is because quite a lot of translations say the mind of the world is turned towards thoughts of generosity or whatever. It's just that's every like a flash of lightning on a dark night turns the mind of the world towards virtue. That's how a lot of translations have it. And I thought, I've always had a problem with this because it's not like that, is it? I mean, when does that happen? And I just suddenly thought, it's the world, it must be a mistranslation. So, I mean, I've got about 8 translations, 7. I think I've got all the translations here. And I realized 2 of them did actually put it the worldly mind, which I'd not noticed before. That I think it is, it's talking about us. I mean, again, the cosmic force of bodhicitta. I mean, it's alive in the world through us. It's not out there. It's lovely to think and talk in those terms sometimes, but no, it's just occasionally our worldly mind. Interestingly, when I was ordained, and as probably most of you know, when we're ordained, we take on a yidam, a visualization practice, and it's not a full tantric initiation. It's a kind of abhisheka. It's an introduction. But Sangharakshita, gave me my practice, and we did the thing and recited the mantra together, and he said, so this will be there for you. If things get a bit mundane. And it was an incredibly sort of everyday way of introducing me. He didn't say you must do this, and it was just when things get a bit mundane, there's the mantra, there's the practice, and it was it kind of ties in. It's a sort of way I can make a sort of a tie-in between your question. I'm kind of quite pleased that I've kind of cracked the code, because I've never been quite satisfied with that verse in the translations that I've.
I mean, it's just so important to have that personal connection.
Yeah.
And whatever we do, we never quite know the effect. And if we're lucky, we get feedback.
Yes.
And somebody will tell you, oh, I was feeling really depressed, and now I felt better. But you never quite know. And it's almost like about valuing more of what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know that you smile at somebody in the street and they were on their way to jump off the bridge, but now they're not going to? It's a bit extreme, but we never know. And I think it's worth having that sense of personal connection to what Shantideva was saying.
Yes, and worth, even if you don't get the feedback, just reflecting on our experience. Like sometimes we will just smile because it's conventional. It's just social politeness, and sometimes we'll think, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And where did that come from? And that's when it's sort of, it's always good to smile. There's a song about that, but I won't.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you again.
We'll see you, yeah.
We've got Sharon from Cardiff.
Hey, Sharon from Cardiff.
I was just thinking, when you talked about the 5th chapter, like the flash of lightning?
The 5th verse, yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, and I really hadn't thought about the individual, like Dhammapadhyaya had said.
Yeah.
And yesterday, I read about the order members in India, and the part that really got me was when I read about them having to pay for oxygen and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And we get it normally, thank God for the NHS sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I know quite a few years ago, I did a coroner appeal. Okay, I asked because I've been shielding for the last 15 months, I decided to ask if they're going to do a telephone appeal.
Oh.
Because I could do, if they're doing a phone appeal, I could do it from here.
Sure.
and just to get some money out there for treatment, because as I said, it really surprised me. And then I contacted when I worked out there, I was with the disaster office, and I contacted the guy out there in Delhi and asked, well, how much are people paying for oxygen then?
Mm.
They're really ill. And he said the equivalent he worked it out in euros, not sterling, and he said it's 150 euros per day just for somebody who's really ill with COVID, they've got to pay for oxygen.
And their relatives are probably having to feed them. I mean, there'll be a lot of people, certainly in the world that we do a lot of our work in, where hospitals aren't set up with people bringing food to you and so on. I mean, it's another world. So I'm glad you brought that up, Sharon. I mean, it's heartrending what's happening there. And Maharashtra, in particular, where a lot of our work is centered, not all of it, is being particularly hard hit. And yeah, literally, in the last 3 days, there's been news of another of our order members who's died, 2 on one day, one I think yesterday or today, and one the day before. So I mean, this is desperate stuff. And they put out an appeal. The Abhaya. Say it again.
Abhaya Ratna.
Thank you. The Abhaya Ratna Fund for £5,500, which seems a very small amount actually. But so if you haven't already received an email about that, do just go to the site, the Abhaya Ratna Fund, and there's an easy way of paying money into it, because I mean things there really are just desperate and not likely to get better in a hurry.
Because I'm not working, so I'm sick. I thought I could offer my time and my past experience rather than
Give them a call, Sharon, and you'll find their phone number on the website, or just drop them a line and just say what you can offer.
I got Sanganath contacting me sometime this week.
Okay, yeah, good. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to keep them in our minds at the moment. I mean, obviously people are suffering all over the world, but these are people who we've particularly strongly connected with. You've got to start somewhere. But and I mentioned, I read those lines from the verse of salutation earlier. And now we're going to hear the transference of merit and self-surrender. And just to say that in about a month's time, I'm doing another session, which will be about the next 2 chapters of the Bodhicharyavatara, from which our 7-fold puja has been extracted. But if you want to know why Shantideva wrote it and how it works and what's really going on under the surface of the 7-fold puja, do come. It'll be lovely to see you again. But for now, I'll just recite, reasonably slowly. We can't do it in call and response. We know Zoom doesn't work. But I'll just read the lines, reasonably slowly. Just stay with it in your own way. Recite it with me if you like. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences, my possessions, and my merit in all 3 ways, I give up without regard to myself, for the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space, so may I become that which maintains all beings, situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace.
Thank you very much, Nagabodhi, for your time and huge background with this text. I look forward to the May the 16th, the next session. probably what will happen is that the video from tonight, slightly edited, will email you a link and the resources that Nagabodhi referred to, PDFs or whatever. So those that have booked can get hold of that. I don't think there is a kind of public place we can just throw it just now, but maybe there will be. So if you want to unmute and say anything by way of goodbye, you're welcome to, and hope to see you next time.
And thank you all for coming. It's been lovely to see you.
Thank you, Nagabodhi.
Thank you, Nagabodhi.
Thank you, Nagabodhi.
Thank you very
Wonderful,
much.
wonderful evening. Thank you.
Oh, great. Good,
Thank
good,
you.
good.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye bye.